Today we're going to be talking about BIM for project management, and we're going to be going over a couple of things that hopefully be new and interesting for you. So just a couple of starting points. Who we are. So if you haven't heard of Microdesk before, we are an AECO industry consulting firm. We've been around since '94. We have 12 locations across the U.S. and now the United Kingdom, and we have over 140 techs and consulting specialists on our team, including a software development team. And pretty much everybody on our technical staff has also worked in the field. Now, what that means is that we're able to offer different services from building information management, whether it's training on how to use that, actually building the models, building the geometry, or consulting on actual projects where we're helping out with coordination services or modeling or anything else. We also work a little bit more, 1,000-foot level, talking about strategy and workflow assessments, mentoring and support. And again, we have an application team with staff. So if there is anything that needs to be customized or created, we can do that. Now, today's presentation is going to be given by myself, Peter Marchese, the Senior Technology Evangelist at Microdesk. So what that means is that I've been working in the field for probably about a little over 20 years now, worked as an architect for about 10 and then moved into the consulting side. I get to play around with all the new coming technology and find out what's actually cool and then what's really useful, and then determine what the workflows are for that. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about BIM for project management. So what that means is we're going to talk about why BIM, a little bit of the information regarding BIM versus CAD, Marketing 101, so what does this mean, what's that actually mean, talking a little bit about proposals and contracts and plan overviews, delivery planning, what tools a new BIM manager and a project manager has access to, and we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. Now, before we get rolling, though, I would like to ask the audience just a couple of questions. So, first one, if you could let me know what your role is. So, are you a designer, engineer? Are you a project manager, principal, or other? Okay. Next one is, are you currently using any BIM applications or software? So Revit, Navisworks, BIM 360 Glue. Alrighty, and then last one before we get rolling, are you currently using any cloud or mobile tools? So it could be any mobile app, whether it's Android or iOS, or cloud tools to help coordinate and work back and forth with your team in the field, or just multiple offices. Cool, interesting results. All righty, thank you very much, everybody who participated in that. Definitely appreciate it. So now let's get rolling. So in terms of why BIM, so for those who aren't quite familiar, BIM is sort of a mixture of different things. The main goals are to help you with productivity, collaboration, and get insight. The big part of BIM, a lot of people tend to focus on the M, the model. It's really on the I, the information. And the goal of this is to help us with our process in all different phases of a building's life cycle. Design, documentation, construction, and then eventually into operations. What this is partially trying to help with is that loss of information and the loss of revenue. So most people have probably seen this sawtooth diagram before. Every time you change from phase to phase, we're going from planning to design to construction. There's, especially when we're talking on the CAD workflows, you're almost always having to take a half step back and then redraw things. You're moving from one tool to another. There's that loss of productivity and, in many respects, time and money. And if there's issues with coordination, we end up with something like this. So, BIM tools, when used correctly, can help avoid problems like this. Now, when we start talking about why BIM, first one that comes up tends to be better or easier coordination. So if anyone's been around for quite a while, you probably remember seeing a plan room, whether it's in the basement of a designer or engineer's office or in the actual facilities building for a site or project. Now, if you have to find something, it's going to be in old rolls of blueprints or vellums or mylars. Or if you're looking at an old CAD file, hopefully they actually use some form of layer management or standards. When we start looking at things in more of a BIM workflow, it's easier to coordinate because things are what they're supposed to be. It's easier to see if there's actually a clash or an issue because objects are physically interfering with each other, as opposed to just seeing two lines that may or may not be above each other or literally in the same space. And because elements know what they are, they have a specific location in space, it's easy to run different clash tools that will then tell you what those problems are. Now, any new tool that comes along, it gives you new features. The great thing is trying to figure out how those new features can turn into new opportunities. So with all the tools that we have now, we're being able to do more than just a regular rendering or 3D view. That's sort of easy. It comes out of the box. So now that we have these tools, how can we use that to offer new services, to make people really understand what our intent is, or to drive home, we're doing this change, which is going to cost money here, to save money down the line. So things like virtual reality, things like energy analysis, those are opening up the doors for additional services that other people might not have been able to do before. They might not have had the manpower or the ability. Now it just comes much easier. And then from there, in many cases, it's actually becoming required. So different places, New York City, SCA, they have specific requirements for BIM, Port Authority, and this is not just locations in the US. What we're seeing is that globally, not only is the adoption of BIM trending on an upswing, it's the mandates as well. So the UK government had a BIM mandate for government projects. The US has different ones in different places, whether you're talking the US Army Corps of Engineers, GSA, Korea, China, it's happening everywhere. And when we look at why people are doing this, it's more than just it's a new tool or it's a new fad or new terminology. When we look at the benefits, we're talking long-term and short-term, a lot of this kind of feeds into each other. The main one that most people were stating, and this is coming from the Smart Market reports, were reduced document errors and omissions. Well, if you're able to produce a project that has less issues, you're probably able to maintain more repeat business, which was the largest percentage that people were stating for the long-term business. So you're able to offer new services, you're able to reduce rework because you're making less mistakes, you're able to see things coming beforehand, and by having those fewer mistakes, you have fewer claims and hopefully increased profits. And this is not just for the architects. When we tend to look at these, you're looking at the benefits of architects, engineers, owners, construction firms. In many cases, those construction firms are the ones that are adopting BIM the fastest in the last few years. And you can see how different people are all looking at similar aspects of the service, offering new services, reducing errors, and maintaining that repeat business. Now, when we tend to look at BIM versus CAD, CAD has been around for quite a while. So if we're looking at CAD as a car, it's a performance vehicle now. It's been tweaked, it's been tuned, it's really doing great things. The thing is, when we start looking at BIM, it's still not much of a comparison. It doesn't matter how fast the car is, it's still going to get overtaken by a plane. But most of you have probably heard of the term garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't matter how good the tool is if somebody doesn't know how to use it. So even if you have something that could be akin to a plane, you're still going to make sure that people are using it correctly. You don't want to use that plane as a car, because if you do, you're going to run into trouble. So the main thing is you have to use the tool correctly. And again, BIM is not just one specific program or application. It's more of a workflow. But the tools that are a part of that workflow do have to be utilized correctly. And that's something that a project manager needs to be aware of as they're moving towards a BIM workflow. Now, in terms of how that workflow actually comes together, when you think of a CAD project, you typically have your base sheet, or base file. You put that on a sheet, and then you're all set. But as you look at things, you're going to have a lot of different files. So you'll have a different file for the first floor, another one for the second one, another one for the third floor. Then you take that file and you XREF it into another file. Then you draw on top of that. Then maybe you XREF that one into another one, and that's where your title block is. When we start looking at something that's more akin to a Revit or a BIM workflow, rather than having the base file and the sheet file, you typically have that model. And that model is probably going to get linked into other models. The architect is going to probably link in the structural file as their background. Link is akin to XREF, but they're not going to have a separate file for each floor or for each use case. Most often, they're going to have just different files for the different disciplines. And then the sheets are going to be a part of that same model. So it's much more coordinated. It's much less disconnected. Now, a lot of the times when we start looking at new tools or workflows, there tends to be a lot of buzzwords, and BIM is no different. When we start trying to figure out, okay, well, what do these mean, and how do they actually apply to reality? So the first one is actually just BIM. So typically BIM is going to stand for Building Information Modeling. For a lot of people, myself included, I feel it's moved a little bit more towards Building Information Management. So the model is not the key in BIM. The information is the I. That's always been the big aspect of it. Models are a part of that. But as we start to look at BIM beyond just doing design, into construction, into facilities management, again, that model is going to be a part of it, but we're also connecting to different data sources or databases. So you're managing that. What are you managing? The design side of things. We're managing our construction side. But the model's not the key. It's really the data. That determines how much you're getting out of it. Next one is that single source of truth. Reality is that every project is going to have multiple models. There's not that single source where everybody's working off of the exact same model. Is it possible? Yes. Do some projects actually do that? Yes. But again, the reality is that's very, very rare. You're typically going to be breaking things up, and as the project progresses, so now you get into maybe construction, you have your shop drawings, you're going to be getting different files back from the actual subs. So you will still have different models that you need to coordinate, consolidate. Clash-free. So the goal of any project is to be fully coordinated, clash-free. But really, you have to define what that means. I mean, we're not going to be clashing conduit, or are we going to be clashing our hot and cold water lines that are only ½ inch? So you have to make sure that, okay, everybody's on the same page with what's going to be coming in, and that kind of ties into a coordinated project. How is it coordinated? When you say coordinated, coordinated how? Are we using programs for that? Are we using manual where we're just overlaying things? So you really have to define what these things mean contractually. You can't just say we have a clash-free project. Are we clashing everything? Do we have to cut holes in the building walls for our outlets? So it can get really esoteric if you want to. So when we start looking at the terminology, again, BIM, that's our Building Information Modeling, our workflow. IPD is Integrated Project Delivery. So what that means is that if we look at the traditional process, the owner would sit down with the designer, they would work on the pre-design, then they would start bringing in the consultants. But the construction team wouldn't actually be brought in until much later in the process. IPD actually brings everybody to the table very early on. And in many cases, they actually put together and create sort of a temporary company. It's an agreement not to sue. It's an agreement to work with each other through all the process. And when it's done and it's done correctly, it can be very beneficial to everybody on staff. Much more of a collaborative environment. Another one is LOD. So level of detail, level of design. Currently, there's two different forms of this. One is the BIM form LOD. That's one you're looking at right now. The AIA also has their own setup of this, and it's a little bit different. But the gist of it is, as the numbers get higher, you're putting more and more detail. Most projects tend to be around the 200 to 300 level of detail for design intent. As you get into construction and then into shop drawings, then you can start looking at the actual fabrication models, which would be in a 350 or 400. And it's not wholesale for the entire project. It's typically specific for certain aspects. Now, where level of detail is looking at your design intent, you also have LOA, which is level of accuracy. So as more projects these days are taking advantage of reality capture, so whether it's flying a UAV over a site and using photographs, or going to the site with a traditional laser scanner. Once you've got that scan, well, how are you asking for it in the first place? How accurate was that scan taken? And if I'm going to model based on that scan, how accurate is the model going to be? So as an example, let's say somebody goes out and scans an office. And the reality is the wall is not perfectly vertical, nor is it straight from front to back. Do I take an average of that and draw the wall vertical in my model? Or do I actually draw that wall slightly canted and warped in the model? So determining and defining the LOA for parts of your project are very important, so that way you know what you're dealing with. And again, clashing. Defining what a clash is, defining what it is you're going to be checking for clashes, so that way you know how accurate the work is and how coordinated it's actually going to be. And then when we start looking at expectations, we have our contracts and a BEP, which is a BIM Execution Plan. And that BIM Execution Plan helps keep everybody on the project on the same page. That lets everybody know, this is what I expect from you, this is what I will be giving to you, and this is what I mean when I say LOD 300. So when we're looking at things like our proposals, we have our documentation that we can get from the AIA or our own office standards. The main thing is to actually be very clear about what you're asking for. What are you saying you're going to deliver? What is the use of that going to be? When are we going to deliver certain levels of detail to you? So the first milestone, you might be level 100. Second milestone, maybe we're at level 200. So putting down on paper and explaining what you're going to be delivering and when you're going to be delivering it is important. Just as important as ensuring I know who to reach out to, what our goals are going to be, what version of the software we're actually going to be submitting, what our priorities are in terms of the model, who's going to be doing what, and what LOD and when the dates are. You know, in many respects, you've got your drawings. You know, image is worth 1,000 words. Our specs, our BIM execution plan, all the paperwork that backs up our project and explains what we're going to be working with, that's our 1,000 words. That defines our process. And one of the things I always like to do is back that up with more images. So that way, everybody understands exactly what that LOD 100 is, so what that 200 is. Again, a little bit of extra effort to help explain and make sure everybody is on the same page, I find is completely worth it to cut off and avoid any issues down the road. So with all that said, we want to actually look at our project and then plan for how we're going to go through this. And like anything else, the first thing is coming up with a good framework. So figuring out, okay, well, who are the parties involved? How are we actually going to share content? And then what methods are we going to take for coordinating that? So we want to make sure we've got that all worked out. Once we have that, we want to figure out, okay, well, what are our stated requirements? What is the owner asking for? You know, most people have probably seen that cartoon where this is how the customer explained it. This is what the architect envisioned. This is how it was really built, and that's what they really wanted. Making sure, again, we're all understanding the requirements and not just what was written or what was said, but everyone's reviewed it and agreed. So what are the guidelines? What are we going to be using the model for? Are there any requirements or analysis that we have to do? Moving from there, okay, well, what are the uses of BIM? In most cases, easy fruit is looking at the documentation. We're going to use BIM to create documents. We're going to use that to create the sheets, so that way we can submit and actually get the building built. But again, that's low-hanging fruit. That's expected at most. From there, what else can we do? Are we going to be doing analysis on our project to ensure that it's the most efficient that can be? Are we going to be using it to coordinate the different trades and ensure that everything lines up correctly? Or are we going to be taking this even further for fabrication? And then once we get to our planning phase, how are we going to be planning that? So we're looking for our clearances. Are we going to be checking for clashes? So working all of this out to figure out, okay, well, what do we need to do and how do we need to do it? And then part of that is ensuring we are all on the same page from a model protocol. What's the file format that we're going to be working on? Are there specific standards that we need to meet? And then how are we actually going to be sharing our content? Is somebody going to be using Dropbox, another one's going to be using FTP, another one's BIM 360? Again, bringing everybody together and coordinating all different aspects of the project. So that way when we get to our deliverables, a lot of this is already worked out. We know exactly what we're going to be modeling. We have an idea of how we're delivering it and what things we're going to be using the model for. Are we doing virtual reality? Are we just doing regular renderings? And then once we've got all that worked out, we can look at the menu of tools and software in front of us and then figure out, okay, well, which ones do we need? And a fun thing to figure this part out is to actually just work from the beginning. Work from the end. So if we know what we have to do, is we have to deliver CDs, analysis, there's a planning board meeting we have to go through, and we know we're going to be using, say in this case, Revit for documentation. So from there, Revit's doing our CDs. And my team is probably going to be using a mixture of Rhino, SketchUp, or Format for the early on sketches. So I know that those are going to be working their way into there. And if I want to keep things really clean inside of Revit, maybe I throw Dynamo into that. And that creates my Revit content based off of my Rhino content. And if I'm going to be doing any analysis, perfect. Revit goes to Insight 360, and that creates my analysis. That way I can ensure that my design in Revit is very efficient, making sure I'm doing the most for my client. If I have to present to a planning board, I'll take my Revit model and run it through InfraWorks 360. And that way I can show my building in sight with all the other buildings around it, and I can explain exactly how it's going to be situated. And as my project progresses further, I can bring it into Navisworks and do my estimating. So I can start to see, okay, I know exactly what we need to deliver. We worked out, this is what we're doing, the client asked for this, this, and this, and as part of my experience, I know I have to do these other 5 things. Based on that, I know I'm going to be using these tools to achieve that. Once I have an idea of what I'm delivering, and I know what tools I'll be using, now the fun part is figuring out who do I have that can actually do this. So you start looking at putting your team together, and you have sort of the different areas of knowledge, both of practice as well as the software. And the fun thing is there's a little bit of overlap there, but it's hard to find somebody who knows both sides all the way through. And when you ask people like what their ability is, what we tend to find is that, okay, well, rate yourself in terms of Revit. You get something like, it's a 8 out of 10. The reality is when you're looking at the tools today, they can be so complex and have so many different aspects. What does that actually mean? If you're an 8 out of 10, 8 out of 10 as to what aspect of it? Are we talking the modeling? Are we talking about managing the model, managing the data, creating documents? So a lot of the companies that have implemented BIM, what they've actually started to do is ensure that they know who has what skills. So as part of that, we're looking at things like assessments. So giving people sort of assessments or exams to go through and find out, okay, we know they're really strong on these aspects. And across the board, our entire team, I know which people are good at where and where we need to focus as a company to raise our level in general. So from that, then we can determine, okay, well, what do we need to train on? That way we can bring up the entire company as one, or focus on what our weaknesses are, or focus on where we want to grow. So now that you've figured out, okay, we've got the team, I know who has that skills, how do me as an admin find out what's going on? Most PMs in larger firms very rarely will be using Revit to the same degree as the people that are drafting or doing the design work. It's easy to open up a Revit file in Revit, but it also can be dangerous if you're not using it in the Revit viewer. So what many people will do is they'll open it up in Navisworks. It's a very lightweight tool compared to actually opening up the whole design model. And you can still see what's going on. It's very easy to cut sections. It's very easy to navigate around. But what you typically miss are the documents, the 2D information. So while Navisworks is great for reviewing the model, as is BIM 360 Glue, which opens up the ability to view it on a mobile device or in the cloud and do clashes, what we're finding more people do is take advantage of tools like BIM 360 Team or BIM 360 Docs. The benefit of those two is that, number one, they're web-based. So I just open up a browser. Now I can navigate the model, and I can also navigate my sheets. So me as a project manager, don't need any specialized software, just need Chrome, log into my project, look at my model. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm comparing versions. So when I'm looking at my process, I can see on my own team, okay, this is where we were yesterday. I asked them to take care of this. Where are we with that? Or this is the new file I just got from the engineer. What's different about it from the old version? And I let the software figure it out for me. and then it color codes it, and then I can search it, and I can export out a little report. So me as a PM, I can now view things like this. I can track my changes, I can do markups, and I can comment on things without needing to hop into Revit. So it makes it easier for me in my role to figure out what's going on without needing to learn a whole new software. And then the next step further than this would be our data analytics. So what I mean by that is we've got all this data. Again, the Revit model, BIM itself, that information, that's all data. That's things that we can take advantage of. And when we start looking at all this data that's in there, whether it's how many doors do we have, how many people do we have that know Revit, now putting that together and starting to track that. A lot of firms have Power BI. There's part of it that's free, but it also comes with Office 365. You can actually take a Revit model and export that and put it in there. And then you can track the changes. You can see how many warnings you have. If you're coming at it from a BIM manager or a project manager, there's different things that you can get out of that. And when we start looking at this kind of data, you can essentially create workflows as a PM. Say, okay, this is how much I have here. This is how much it costs. Tying that information together to really track and see how many people are working on your project. How much information is in that model? How many sheets do you have? When you first started the project, maybe you did a cartoon set, and I determined I would need 108 sheets to finish the set. So I can track and see where we are. So it's actually analyzing the process, analyzing the information that I already have to take my project even further. So just to wrap up, so when we start looking at things like why BIM, we're looking to ask, okay, well, why are we doing this as opposed to the old way? And the old way is CAD. It's not taking advantage of the information. We're drawing lines. We're creating objects, but those objects don't necessarily know what they are. So BIM just allows us to do much more with less. And the more complex the project, yeah, things will get a little bit harder, but there's a lot of benefits to that. There's more things that we can take out of it. And that hopefully leads to more opportunities to either have more billable services or just more opportunities to do a better job in general. We talked about some of the buzzwords in the marketing and what those actually mean. And then we talked about some delivery planning, all the different things that you want to make sure you run through. And then some different tools that managers have access to help them track and manage their process.